Hey music teachers, it's Jill and today's teacher tip is for the instrumental folks. Band and orchestra directors, I'm looking at you. If your class is struggling with management due to the chaos of the beginning of the rehearsal, everyone coming in and getting out their stuff, then this is something that you can try. This tip is especially helpful if you have beginner students or if you have a little tougher than usual class. We've all had that one that comes in and just struggles to meet expectations every day. This is for those kids. Many of us are used to that same old routine of kids trickle in, the bell rings at some point, and everyone's getting their instrument out, heading to their seat, horsing around, getting their folder. And that kind of setup it works for a lot of people, but for some groups of kids, it can be really chaotic and distracting, and it'll make it hard for them to get focused at the beginning of rehearsal. So if this sounds like your class, you're going to try and flip it around to create a more orderly and organized beginning of class routine. Here's the new routine. Step 1, when students come in, they are going to get their instrument and folder, head to their chair directly, and then set their instrument at their feet or under their chair, not assemble it. The second step is, as soon as the bell rings, and I mean as soon as the bell rings, you're going to start doing a warm-up exercise. So this can be a breathing exercise if you're on the wind band side. If not, it can be sizzling rhythms. It can be a call and response, anything that requires the students to think about music but not have an instrument. Then the third step is, once you've done about 2 minutes or so of warming up together, it doesn't have to be long, just something to get the group all together. Then you'll have the students assemble their instrument at their seat and tuck their case back under their chair, behind their chair, wherever it belongs, but without leaving their seat. This can be however long it needs to be, depending on the age of your students. If it's beginners, it's going to take them longer. If they're older, that's fine too. If they're string players, it's different than if they're clarinet players. However long you think it should take to get instruments together. And then you can give them a 30-second warning when it's about to be done, so that the ones that kind of have their stuff together already can start getting whatever next warm-up they're going to do out of their folder. Then after you finish the group warm-up, you can move on with literature, method, anything else that you're going to do for that day. What this method does is it gets everybody doing the same thing at the same time at the very beginning of rehearsal. This method will take time to adjust, but I ask, if you give it a try, to do it for a couple of weeks and give it a chance to work, because there will be stragglers in the beginning that are not ready and aren't moving with everybody else. But there's a certain pressure involved with, oh my gosh, everyone's moving on without me, that will help rein in those stragglers. If you decide to give this a try mid-year, when it's something that the kids are not used to, give them a couple of days of warning and say, hey, on Wednesday we're starting this, and then make sure they know what's going to happen. And kids do better with a schedule change when they have an idea of what's going to happen and they know what to expect. On the day of, if your class is especially resistant to change, it's good to have a couple of section leaders come in early and help with reminders and let them know what's going on and say, hey, this is what we're doing now. Remember, it's time to go. Here's a couple of extra tips that'll help this run a little more smoothly. Number 1 is, if you have percussionists who don't necessarily have a seated spot in your classroom, then you're going to give them an area to stand. So you can put some posters up in the back, like, oh, Johnny, stand under the blue poster, or whatever. Some people don't mind having seats in their percussion section, and I'm one of those people that never had chairs back there, because the second I put chairs back there, the percussionists would sit down when we were rehearsing and then miss their cue because they weren't paying close enough attention to their music. But if you want to have chairs for your percussion section, it's a free country. Do what you want. Number 2 is, if you have some instruments that take longer to put together than others. In this case, for me as a band director, this was woodwinds versus brass. It takes 5 seconds for somebody to pop on a brass mouthpiece, whereas the clarinet players, the younger they are especially, are going to take longer. So I would set 2 alarms so that my first alarm would go off and I'd say, okay, brass, let's do these couple of lip slurs or sirens or whatever we're going to do. The clarinet players and the saxophone players get an extra minute. And finally, for an extra tip, if you are using this as kind of training wheels to get students to have a more traditional warm-up routine, then here's how you train them out of it. After they have this whole routine down and they're showing that they can do it, they are ready for more responsibility, the first step in allowing more independence is to, once they have put their instruments together, you set another timer for 2 minutes or however long you feel is appropriate, and they can warm up on some set of exercises that you've given them on their own, not with the group. This is going to introduce a little bit more chaos because not everyone's going to be doing the same thing at the same time, but it'll give students a chance to prove that they can handle that chaos and then still come back together as a group after that time is over. If they prove they can't handle it, move back to the way that you were doing before. If they can, keep doing that for a while and move to step 2. Step 2 is the same, but you allow them to choose whatever they want to warm up on. So they can do their scales, they can do, if they're working on solos, they can kind of practice through a few bars of that. They can practice out of their method book, anything that's not an approved warm up. If you want a next step, you can allow the students to get up and put their cases back in their cubby or wherever they're stored after that. Depending on how you're set up, it may or may not work. But just taking those baby steps back toward the traditional process allows students to gain their freedom one step at a time. Remember that students can always go back to the previous step. If you get to a step and you're like, this isn't working out as well as I hoped, you can always return to that previous step that was working and work on that a little bit while longer, or keep it as your regular routine. There's nothing wrong with having an out-of-the-box routine. There are some students who thrive with this and will continue to thrive with it. And so only you can know what's best for your students in your classroom. As a reminder, please do make sure, if you try this, to give it a couple of weeks to work because, like I said, it won't be perfect on the first day. That's it for today's music teacher tip. We'll catch you next time.